Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second in our series of I'm for Developer webinars, Maestro API. My name is Melissa Marsh on our Developer Programs Marketing team, and I'll be moderating this session today. Next slide, please. I'm here with Uma Nathan, Lead Product Manager, Josh Mora, Software Engineer, who will be presenting and demoing today, along with Sahit Golapudi, Director of Engineering, and Kamran Bahati, Senior Developer Support Engineer, who will address questions via the Q&A box throughout the webinar and after the demo when we open up the floor to questions. Next slide, please. All right, housekeeping. Next slide. Before we get started, we have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. You are placed in listen-only mode, and this session is being recorded. You'll receive an email in about a week from the webinar with the recording and all the other resources. Please be sure to use the Q&A box or button to ask questions at any time. Feel free to ask them as they occur to you, and we'll answer via the Q&A box or let you know we'll answer them live after the demo. To copy and save your questions and answers, simply right-click on them and copy and save to your desktop or document. Next slide. All right, so is this webinar right for you? Well, this is a webinar for developers. If you're not a developer, you're more than welcome to stay, or you can check out Docusign 101 at events.docusign.com/Docusign101, and I'll drop that into the chat for those who might be interested in that. There you go. All right, next slide. Now, this is just our safe harbor notice. So all of the values, email addresses, keys, secrets, tokens, and other personal information that you see here today are for demo purposes only and will be deleted or revoked after the webinar. You should see a quick poll on your screen in just a moment. If you can answer those questions, that will help us understand where you are in your development journey and enable us to customize content for this and future webinars. So that's it for the housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started. Uma, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. So today we will cover Intelligent Agreement Management, or IAM, provide a presentation on the Maestro API, which is one of the core pillars of IAM, discuss its use cases and how to get started building with it, and then open the session for live Q&A, and finally we'll conclude with some resources. So let's begin with what the current status of agreement is. Next slide, please. Next slide. Over the years, it has become clear that agreements contain critical business data, but this data often remains locked in static flat files. So these legacy systems and workflows result in inefficiencies, missed opportunities, and nearly $2 trillion in lost global economic value annually. So we are calling this the agreement trap. So the existing agreement processes are complex, time-consuming, and not integrated with other business operations. So how do we solve this problem? Next slide, please. Enter Docusign IAM. So Docusign is modernizing agreement management with its new platform, Docusign IAM. It uses AI and integrates seamlessly with existing business processes and systems, transforming how businesses of all sizes create, execute, and manage agreements efficiently. So what are the core components of IAM? Next slide, please. So Docusign IAM comprises of three core pillars of platform services. The App Center, which allows you to customize and extend your agreement process by integrating partner apps within Docusign. You can create and integrate apps into the Docusign UI using our developer console and upload them to the App Center. Secondly, Navigator, which allows you to centrally store, manage, and analyze all your agreements with advanced AI-powered search and reporting capabilities. The Navigator API is coming soon. And last but not the least, Docusign Maestro, which allows you to build and deploy customized workflows to automate and accelerate agreement processes without writing any code. Today, we are going to dive into the Maestro API, which enables you to connect agreement workflows across systems through APIs. So the Maestro API the developer console, and extension apps are all in beta, and we invite you to participate. You can visit developers.docusign.com to get started. Now, let's dive into Maestro API. Next slide, please. So Maestro API offers programmatic capabilities to create, manage, and monitor your workflows. It basically provides a framework for managing your agreement processes from start to finish. Imagine being able to set up an entire agreement process with just a few API calls. So basically, you can define the steps involved, set up conditional logic to handle different scenarios, and automate the entire process. One of the key strengths of the Maestro API is its ability to integrate with third-party systems of record, example, CRMs like Salesforce, HubSpot, or cloud storage applications like Google Drive or Box. By integrating Docusign modules with these systems of record, you can automate data retrieval and updates and respond to events and take downstream actions. So this automation reduces the need for manual data entry and checks, which are often sources of errors and delays. Now let's look at some of the key features. Next slide, please. On the workflow automation side, we touched on this on the previous slide, how you can set up entire workflows through code, tailoring them to your specific needs. So this makes sure that your agreement processes are consistent, repeatable, and scalable. When it comes to event triggers, it's a key feature of the Maestro API. They enable you to automate actions based on specific events within your workflow. For instance, you can set triggers to initiate actions such as sending notifications, updating records, or starting new workflows when certain conditions are met. Example, say when an envelope is complete or other external events and systems of record, right? You can respond to that as well. For example, opportunities closed won in Salesforce or employees signing an offer letter in an HR system. So the next feature is the conditional logic. It allows complex decision-making within workflows through conditional logic. So basically, you can define conditions and branches within your workflows, allowing them to take different paths based on specific criteria. This is essential for handling varied scenarios and ensuring that each step in the workflow is executed correctly based on the current context. When it comes to monitoring, Maestro helps you keep track of every step in your agreement process in real time. So with this visibility, you can quickly identify bottlenecks or issues that need attention. Essentially, you can see where each agreement is in the process, who's responsible for the next step, and how long each step takes, etc., if you want to fine-tune it. We also provide good error handling mechanisms, ensuring that your workflows can handle and recover from errors gracefully. This allows you to define how the system would respond to errors, whether by retrying operations or logging incidents, etc. Next slide, please. So we can classify these APIs into two broad categories. One, which allows you to manage the workflow definitions that mirror business processes, and the workflow runtime instances is specifically where you can manage them as well. So you will see these in action during the live demo. Next slide, please. So now let's look at the use case that Josh is going to demo live. So this is a simplified new account opening scenario, say with a credit union or a bank, and the customer provides some key information to kick off the process, basically using web forms. And then they sign an envelope with the pre-populated information, whereby an account is created in the system of record, in this case, Salesforce. And then finally, the signed documents are stored in Box. So you can imagine how this can be extended to other use cases or scenarios where it can kick off downstream processes like, sending out customer welcome packages, provisioning access for those customers for their portal, and then compliance checks, etc. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Josh for the live demo.
Thank you, Uma. So like Uma just mentioned today, we'll be demonstrating how to use the Maestro API to manage your workflows, trigger new instances, and monitor the progresses of those instances. But before that, we first need to build our Maestro workflow via the designer UI. So starting from the Docusign homepage, I've logged into an account that has Maestro enabled. In order to navigate to your Maestro workflows, you're going to click the Agreements tab up at the top. And then on the left-hand side, you should see a section called Maestro Workflows. Once you click into that, you'll be taken to the Workflows list page, which displays a list of workflows that have been created on this account. On this page, you can see a variety of details related to your workflows, such as the workflow name, the published status, the last time it was modified, as well as which user on your account created each workflow. You also have the ability to start new instances using the Start button here on the right. In our case, we're creating a brand new workflow to fit the account opening use case for Tally Bank. So I'm going to click Create Workflow up here at the top right. So like Uma mentioned earlier, we're going to be building a brand new workflow for an account opening use case here at Tally Bank. So I'm going to walk through configuring a Maestro workflow with a series of steps, and I will show how they can all integrate with each other seamlessly. So after you click the Create Workflow button, you'll be presented with this workflow setup modal. The process builder will now be prompted to begin defining what we call workflow participants, as well as starting variables. Participants provide process builders a mechanism to define the different actors of a workflow, and these individuals are the people responsible for interacting with the workflow as it's executing. Normally, one participant executes multiple steps within a workflow. For example, a single participant might perform all of these steps within the same workflow. They'll receive an invite, they'll fill out a web form, they'll authenticate themselves via IDV, and they'll e-sign a contract. Participants are normally defined when creating the workflow, and additional participants can be added later at any time. But for now, I'll be closing this modal and we'll return to it when it's necessary. So now we've reached the designer canvas for our Maestro workflow, and we can begin building the workflow to fit our use case. So as we can see, we have this option to add a step to our workflow. And if I click this, this gives me a list of modules that are available for my account. This includes first-party modules like web forms, identity verification, e-signature, as well as any third-party modules that I have installed in my account, such as Google Drive, Salesforce, and Box. Third-party apps are installed and managed via the Docusign App Center, which can be accessed through the step selector using this Browse Apps button at the very bottom, or using the App Center button at the top right. So for our workflow, we first need to add a step, which will invite the participant to begin interacting with the workflow. So in this case, we're going to be selecting the Setup Invite step. We're going to be clicking the Configure button, and we'll begin configuring this step. As you can see, there's a warning up here that tells the process builder that this specific step requires at least one variable in order to finish the configuration of it. It's mentioning that we need to add a couple of starting variables as well as a participant in order to determine who needs to interact with this workflow step. So starting with the participant, if I select this drop down here, you'll notice that we get a prompt that says we haven't added any workflow participants. So I'll go ahead and click the Add Participants button right here, and we'll see the same workflow setup modal that we started with when we clicked Create Workflow. At this point, it's necessary to add a participant for our workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add Participant here, and then I'll name our participant Applicant. In addition to that, I'm going to add a couple starting variables to capture some of the data related to that applicant participant we just created. The first variable is going to be a text variable, and this variable is going to hold the applicant's name. The second variable I'm going to add is also a text variable, and this is going to hold the applicant's email. Variables in a Maestro workflow hold space for the user's dynamic information and can be used to connect data from one step to the next. Starting variables, like I've defined here, are defined in the workflow setup modal. The values for these starting variables are provided by the person who's triggering a new workflow instance for this definition that we're creating. So now that I've configured my new participant as well as the two starting variables, I can go ahead and click Save here. Now, if we return to this dropdown, we can actually see that the warning has gone away in this step configurator. And then we can begin mapping the different workflow variables to these dropdowns. So I'm going to select the applicant participant that I just created. And then I'm also going to map the applicant name and applicant email to this step. I have the option to include a custom message, but for today's demo, I'm going to leave that blank, and then I'm going to hit apply. Now this invite step has been configured, we can begin moving on to the next step to add to our workflow. This next step, we're going to need to capture some additional data for our applicant participant, and we're going to be leveraging our collect data with web form step. So I'm going to add that to our workflow, and I'm going to click configure. The first step of this configurator is asking us to select which form we want to use for this specific step. So if I click this search bar here, it's going to present me with a list of active web forms that are available on my account that are also compatible with Maestro. For today, I'm going to select the Tally Bank new applicant form. And now if I click next, it's going to prompt me to select which participant I want to interact with this web form step. So again, I'm going to select the applicant participant that I created. And now it's giving me the option to map some additional data fields. What this allows me to do is pre-fill some of the fields in my web form with some workflow variables from previous steps, which will reduce the amount of manual entry that the participant needs to do as they're interacting with the workflow. So at this point in the workflow, I have access to the applicant's name and email. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-fill those fields here in the web form right now. I'm going to select the variable. I'm going to select the starting variable as the source. And I'm going to select the applicant name. Similarly, I'm going to select the applicant email to pre-fill this email field. We don't have access to the applicant's phone number, so we're going to leave that up to the participant to fill in. I'm going to select apply here, and we can begin adding our next step. The next step is going to be a get signature step so that we can collect the signature of our applicant participant and they can sign their contract. If I hit configure here, one of the first questions it's going to ask me is which template I would like to use for this e-signature step. Similar to web forms, if I select this dropdown, it gives me access to a list of e-sign templates that are available on my account today that are also compatible with Maestro workflows. So I'm going to select the Tally Bank new application e-sign template. And now that I've selected that, we have access to this allow participants to go directly to signing toggle. What this does is it gives the process builder the option to choose if we want our participant to immediately be redirected to sign the envelope once it's been created in the workflow, or we can opt to have them receive an email in their inbox if they want to access the envelope at a later time. For today's demo, I'm going to leave this toggle on because we want our participant to go directly to signing once the envelope is available. I'm going to hit next. And now we need to map a participant to the applicant recipient role in my e-sign template. So I'm going to select the applicant participant from my workflow. And I'm also going to provide the name and email. In this case, I'm going to use the web form step as the source of the name. And I'm going to pull the full name from the web form step. Similarly, I'm going to pull the email from that same web form step. And now if I hit next, I'm also given the option to map some data fields. If I click map to data fields, I have the option to select a template role. So I can select the applicant role in my e-sign template. And similar to web forms, we have the ability to pre-fill some of the e-sign tabs which again reduces the amount of manual entry that our participant will need to do as they're interacting with the workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-fill the information that I have at this point in the workflow. So that will be the full name from the web form, the email from the web form, as well as the phone number from the web form. I'm going to select apply here, and now we finished configuring our get signatures step. So at this point in the workflow, the participant will have completed all the steps they need to interact with. So we need to show them a screen confirming that they've completed all of their assigned tasks. All of the subsequent steps after this will execute behind the scenes, and they require no participant interaction. So in that case, I'm going to add another step to our workflow, and that's going to be this show a confirmation screen step. I'm going to click configure here. And as we can see, this step allows us to show our participant a confirmation screen so that they know that they've completed all of their assigned tasks. I'm going to select the participant who will see these messages, and that will be our applicant participant. And I'm going to leave the message type, title, and message body as the defaults, but all of these are customizable to your liking. I'm going to click apply here, and that confirmation screen step has now been configured. The next thing we want to do is begin writing back some of the applicant information to our system of record. In this case, it's going to be Salesforce. So I'm going to click add a step here, and I'm going to scroll down to access some of my third-party applications that I have installed on my account. And I'm going to select the write back to Salesforce step. I'm going to select configure here. And now that I've selected the write back to Salesforce step, we can see that it's automatically detecting the Salesforce connection that I've added via the Docusign App Center. And now I'm going to select the account Salesforce object because that's the one that we want to create for our new applicant. And then I'm going to click next. Now it's prompting me to add a rule. What rules do for write back to Salesforce steps. It allows us to update any existing records that match any rules that I create. If there's no match, or if I don't set any matching rules, a new record will automatically be created behind the scenes. So in this case, I do want to add a rule to avoid creating any duplicate accounts. So I'm going to begin configuring that here. In this modal, we have the option to select which Salesforce field we want to use for our comparison. So I'm going to select the account name, and I want to compare that to the applicant's name. So I'm going to grab the applicant's name. That's an output of our get signatures step. And I'm going to select the applicant full name value here. I'm going to click save. And then I'm going to click next. And now the step is asking us which fields we want to write back data to. It's giving us access to the account name because it's a required field when creating a new account object in Salesforce. But if I click this Manage Fields button, it gives me access to all of the other fields that are available for a Salesforce account object. In this case, I also want to save the account phone number and write the applicant's phone number back to this account object. So now that I've saved and selected that, you can see that the account phone number is added to this list of fields that we see here. So I'm going to begin mapping workflow variables to these two Salesforce fields. Again, I'm going to select the applicant's full name and map that to the Salesforce account name. And I'm going to select the applicant's phone number and map that to the account phone number in Salesforce. I'm going to select apply here, and our write back to Salesforce step is now complete. And lastly, we want to archive our signed documents to our Box account. So I'm going to add one more step to our workflow. And if I scroll down at the very bottom, we have access to a store files in Box step. So I'm going to click configure. Now it's prompting me to select which files I want to archive. And if I click this dropdown, it's giving me access to the combined signed documents that are an output of our e-signature step. So I'm going to select that here. When I hit next, similar to our Salesforce step, it's automatically going to detect the box connection that I've established via the Docusign App Center. And now it's prompting me to select which folder I want to archive these documents to. So I'm going to open this up and select Tally Bank New Applications, which is going to contain all of the signed documents for all instances that are run from this workflow that I'm creating. I'm going to select Next, and I'm just going to give a name to this document as it's being archived. I'm going to add envelope ID as some text, and then I'm going to attach the actual envelope ID from the Get Signatures step. Now, that means when the signed documents get archived, they're going to be named envelope ID dash whatever envelope ID is associated with the envelope that was created for that workflow instance. Now I'm going to hit apply. And now, as we can see, this workflow has been built out to fit the account opening use case that we mentioned earlier. So last thing I'm going to do is click Save Draft here, and that it's going to prompt me to name my new workflow. I'm going to name it Tally Bank Account Opening. And then I'm going to hit Save here. At this point in the workflow, we can click the Review and Publish button on the top right to begin publishing our workflow and so that it's ready to generate new instances. But in this case, we're going to showcase how to do that through the Maestro API. So I'm going to move over to my Postman. And I'm going to update some of the environment variables to match the environment that I was working in. And the first API call that we want to use using the Docusign Maestro API collection I have here is we want to get the list of definitions that are associated with my account. So I'm going to click this Get Workflow Definitions Metadata request here in Postman. I've already updated my Postman environment to include the demo host environment as well as my account ID. If I send this request, what will happen in the response is we should get a list of all the workflows that have been created for my Docusign account. And we're most interested in the new workflow that I just created using the designer. And we can find that at the bottom of the list, we have our workflow named Tally Bank Account Opening. So I'm going to grab the workflow definition ID that's associated with that and update my Postman environment variables accordingly. And then the next thing we want to do is actually publish that workflow definition. So the next request we're going to make in Postman is this post request to publish a workflow definition. Again, I've already updated to use the new workflow definition ID for the new workflow that I just created. So I'm going to send a request. Since this is our first time publishing the workflow, we're going to get a message in the response that mentions that consent is required. And it's also going to provide us with a consent URL. We're going to redeem this consent URL by pasting this into our browser. And it's going to prompt me to log in with my Docusign account. And now we can see that we've provided consent for Maestro. Now I'm going to return to my Postman. And what providing consent does is it allows Maestro to act on behalf of the user, in this case, that's myself, to do things like create e-sign envelopes. After providing consent, we can send another publish request here in Postman. And the response should now include a message confirming both the publish request, and it will provide a poll URL we can use to check the workflow status. Now that the workflow is in the process of publishing, the next API request we're going to do is get the actual workflow definition. So I'm going to select this get request right here. Again, I've updated my Postman to include the updated workflow definition ID. And if I click send here, we're going to get a response with some details related to the Tally Bank account opening workflow that I just created. We can see it includes some account and user information, the date that the workflow was created. It also includes the JSON representation of the workflow definition that I created via the designer UI. But most importantly, we're interested in this status property here, which shows the published status of our workflow definition. As we can see, it shows active. That tells us that our workflow definition is published, and we can begin generating and triggering new workflow instances for this workflow definition. So what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to copy the trigger URL, and we are ready to trigger new workflow instances. On the left-hand side, I'm going to go up to this post request so we can trigger a brand new instance. And I'm going to paste in our new trigger URL. When building the request to trigger your workflow, you need to construct a payload. As part of the Maestro Trigger API, we've defined a payload structure that needs to be passed in the request to trigger a workflow. The schema for that can be found in the Maestro API documentation, and we'll share that in the chat below. In addition to that, the trigger URL that I just pasted up here in Postman can also be integrated with your third-party software and can be used to trigger new instances of your workflow. For the demo today, I've already created a payload that fits the structure that we've defined, and that includes the two starting variables that I've defined for the workflow in the designer, which includes the applicant name as well as the applicant email. So at this point, we can go ahead and send the post request here and begin triggering a new workflow instance for our workflow. In the response, we're going to get two things. One is the instance ID for the instance that I just triggered, as well as a URL to access that workflow instance. What I'm going to do is grab the instance ID from the response, and then I'm going to update my corresponding Postman variable. And before I actually switch over to the perspective of the workflow participant, there's one more request that we can make here, and that's going to be the get workflow instance details here on the left-hand side. So if I click into this and I send this request, what this will do is return a bunch of details that are related to the workflow instance that I just created. So that includes the workflow definition that's associated with that, the name of the instance, the instance ID. If we scroll down here, we also see some information that tells us who started the workflow instance, as well as the progress of that workflow instance. In this case, the workflow that I've created has a total of 6 steps. And since I just triggered that workflow, a total of 0 steps have been completed. Now switching over to the perspective of the workflow participant, what I'm going to do is pull open their email inbox. And then if I hit refresh, we should see that there's now an email invite. And if I click into this, you can see that we're provided a link to access and complete the workflow. So when I click review here, we'll be taken to the instance that I just triggered via Postman, and we'll be shown the first step in that workflow, which is the web form. If I click the start button here, you can see as we configured it in our workflow, the full name and email fields have been pre-filled with the information of the applicant. So that includes their full name and their email. So I'm going to provide the applicant's phone number here. Once I hit next, we see a summary page of all the information that I just entered. Everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. In a couple of seconds here, the participant will be redirected to the eSign envelope that gets created for this workflow instance. If I hit agree and continue here, again, we can see that some of the eSign tabs here have been pre-filled with some information from the workflow. That includes the applicant's full name, the applicant's email, as well as the applicant's phone number. As the applicant, I'm going to sign here at the bottom, provide my signature, and then I'm going to select finish. At this point in the workflow, the applicant participant has finished all of their assigned tasks for this specific workflow instance. So in a couple of seconds here, we should be able to see the task complete page that we've configured in our workflow. Now behind the scenes, the account in Salesforce is getting created for our new applicant, as well as the signed documents are being archived to our Box account. So in order to validate that, I'm going to switch over to our Salesforce account. And this is our Salesforce account for our process builder. On the top left, I'm going to go navigate to the accounts that have been created in our Salesforce account. And we can see that a new account has been created in our Salesforce account that includes the applicant's full name, as well as the phone number that they entered in the web form. In terms of archiving the signed document, I'm going to switch over to our Box account. And if I check the Tally Bank new applications folder, we should be able to see that a new document was added today. And if I click into this, we should see that all of the information in the envelope is included here, including the applicant information, as well as their signature, as well as the certificate of completion attached to the bottom here. If I switch over back to Postman, there's a couple of more APIs that we can make calls to. We're going to send another request for the get workflow instance details request here. Again, this is going to return some details around the workflow instance that we just executed. If I scroll down to the bottom and check the progress, we can see that the completed steps match the total steps that are in our workflow definition. And the last completed step was the store files in Box. If we scroll up a little bit, we can see that the workflow instance state itself has been switched over from in progress to completed. We also get some information such as when the workflow instance was completed itself. If we want to get more granular in terms of details around our workflow instance, we can also get some details around each specific step that was executed in our workflow instance using this get list of step histories request on the left. If I send this request and pass the proper instance ID, what we'll get in the response is details related to each workflow step that was executed for this specific workflow instance. So in this case, for the setup invite step, where we invited the participant to access the workflow, we can see that some of the outputs that are included are the participant's name and email, as well as their role in the workflow instance. If we scroll down a little bit for the web form step, we can see things like the step state, which shows that this web form step was completed, as well as some of the outputs that are included here, which include the web form ID and web form name. Similarly, for the get signature step, some of the outputs that are included include the envelope link as well as the envelope ID. And that's it for the demo. We've created a Maestro workflow that fits our account opening use case for Tally Bank. Switching back to our slideshow here, I do want to call out a couple of slides after this. The first one being the Postman collection that I used for the demo today is actually a public collection that features ready-to-use requests and documentation from Docusign's public workspace. So if you want to make requests similar to the demo that I did today, Feel free to access the public Postman collection using the link that we will share today, as well as after the webinar. I also want to make a call out to the Maestro API SDK, as well as Docusign Quick Start. So the Maestro API SDKs provide access to the Maestro API, similar to what you saw today, but in your preferred programming language, such as C#, Java, Node.js, and so on. Similarly, Docusign Quick Start has been updated to include 3 code examples for the Maestro API. So if you access Docusign Quick Start, you'll be able to download your own personalized sample project, and you can play around with the Maestro APIs as well. Again, we'll share the links in the chat today, as well as after the webinar. And lastly, I want to highlight what we call the My Maestro sample app. This showcases how the Maestro API can be used to trigger and manage workflow instances. The cool thing about this is you can experiment with the Maestro API in a more interactive environment. In the My Maestro sample app, it includes links to the source code as well as step-by-step instructions on how the Maestro API is used in each scenario. And I can pull this open here. To show what the My Maestro sample app looks like. So once you navigate to the URL, you can see that you're taken to this homepage and you have the ability to click Try the app. Once you click Try the app, you can select an authentication type you want to use to log in. So in this case, I'm going to select JSON Web Token, and I'm going to select Login. After logging in, you're presented with 2 options. You can trigger a workflow, and you can manage your workflows. If you click Get Started under Trigger Workflow, this will show you a list of sample Maestro workflows that you can trigger here on the right-hand side. It also provides some additional information, such as the status of the last workflow instance for each workflow definition, the name of the workflow definition itself, as well as the workflow type. On the left-hand side, if you collect behind the scenes, you'll see some information such as an overview of the scenario that's being shown here on this page, some links to the source code, as well as step-by-step instructions on how to integrate with the Maestro API. Similarly, if we go back to the home page and select Manage Workflows, you'll be taken to a page that will show any running instances that you've triggered using the My Maestro app. Same thing, if you select the Behind the Scenes dropdown here, you'll be presented with the scenario overview for this page, a link to the source code, as well as step-by-step instructions on how to integrate with the Maestro API. And that is it.
All right, thanks so much, Josh. Okay, so Kamran and Sahid, do we have any questions that might benefit the whole audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was some of the questions were covered during the presentation. One was just a confirmation as to whether or not it's going to be possible to pre-populate Maestro workflows with variables so that the data can be leveraged in the workflow steps. So I believe, and I hope I understand the question correctly, but I think we demonstrated how that's going to be possible from the API, as well as from just the UI when we were demonstrating that. But if you, Josh, if you wanted to just show that one more time, that might be worthwhile for everybody.
Yeah, you're talking about the starting variables when triggering a workflow?
You got it.
Yeah. So if I go back to my Postman collection here and go back to the post request, again, if you see in the request payload, we're passing in values for the 2 starting variables that I configured from my workflow definition. That was the applicant name and applicant email. So whenever you're triggering a new workflow instance, you can pass values using this format here.
Okay, come on, any others?
So, I mean, at a high level, I know there's been some questions about third-party apps. Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about the integration with App Center and how that process is kind of working with, in terms of taking, we get these manifest files all the time. And then now what our job is to then, go through that process of verifying those manifest files and getting those published. Both internally, we have these 1P apps that we're developing and 3P apps that we're working with partners. But if you could show a little bit about the App Center integration, just to show how that could work, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me navigate back to my Maestro workflows page. And if I go back to the workflows list and then reopen the workflow that I just created. If you want to see how the integration with the App Center works with Maestro, there's two ways that you can reach the App Center. One is using the step selector at the very bottom. There's a Browse Apps section that will take you to the App Center. But for ease of access, there's also a button up here at the top of the designer. Once you click the button at the top of the designer, you'll be taken to the Docusign App Center, which gives you access to all of the extension apps that are available today. So you'll see you have access to third-party apps like Dropbox, Salesforce like we saw today, as well as Google Drive. And if you select one of these apps, we'll take Salesforce, for example. This will take you to the specific apps page. And if I log in here with my demo account, we'll actually see that the Salesforce app has already been installed for my account, and I can manage some of the existing connections that I've created. But if I go back to the App Center and I select one of the apps that I have not configured, let's take Dropbox, for example, you'll see the option to install the app. At this point, after you install the app, you can then create a new connection. And then once that connection is created, if you navigate back to Maestro Workflows, then that third-party app will show up in this step selector here so that you can start integrating that third-party app with your Maestro Workflows.
Cool. Josh, can we do a little bit more on this just to show the distinction between the 1P apps, the ones by Docusign, versus the 3P apps that are by a third-party publisher back in App Center?
Yeah, so if I go back to the App Center, yeah, are you talking about the extension apps that are available
Yeah,
here
just as extension
versus?
app, just to show that underneath it, like for instance, that OneDrive by DocuSign indicates that it's a 1P app that we've developed. But when you look at Glue, for instance, right beside it, it's by Sandbox Banking, which was a third-party partner that we worked with. There is another question about CLM and whether there's DocuSign products within the API. I want to keep the context here to the Maestro side of things, but there are third-party apps here. Like if we look at that Google Drive, there's one of these. I don't know if it's Google Drive or there's a Docs. Oh, SAP Ariba. I think that one, if you click on it in the bottom left corner,
Yep.
you scroll down a little bit. One of the things that you're going to notice is that there's a works with, and that's going to let you know which apps work with CLM versus maybe other applications. So it does work with CLM. Some apps will. So this is how you can get parts of Maestro to work with CLM. We've got another question here. It says, on a document, how can I input a field which collects data once but populates it on multiple fields that requires the same information? I think Sahid's looking at answering that.
Yeah, you can actually do that. I think in the demo also, Josh showed that he collected information in the web forms like the phone number. And based on that, he could also reference that phone number into other documents. So in the other steps, right? So, but then you can only access the data from the previous steps, but you cannot access data from if another step that comes after the step that you are in, right? Because it's only like top down. So you cannot go from the step that you don't even know whether there is a step present or not, right? Does it answer your question? And
Someone?
I think there is also one more question. How do you run bulk sends and power forms, right? So yeah, as of now, we don't have that in Maestro, but we are looking into it. And Omar can answer if there's anything that you want to go with it.
Yeah, so we're continuing to add integration, both Docusign apps as well as third-party apps. So even in terms of feature parity with eSign capabilities that Josh was demoing. So it's in the works, but it's not available right now.
Okay, it looks like we have a couple more questions. One is, can you please share an example with Workday? I'm not sure if that's possible, but wanted to see.
So yeah, so the HR use cases, like Workday, SAP SuccessFactors, we don't have an integration yet, but we are looking into it as we get into some of these different verticals. We will be building integrations to that as well.
Yeah, we got another one here about third-party apps. Can third-party apps bring their own web forms?
Currently, no.
Will the Maestro API work with Docusign document generation?
That is the Docusign apps that Omar was referring to, where we are currently building that integration to be standalone. But there is also another document generation within the eSign signature that we are currently working on, which will be released sooner than integrating with the Docusign document generation.
There's another question here about the best way to allow a user to have their docs stored in their own database. So a developer, or is there customer-facing side to design or build? So I think the question is there a way to have the documents stored in their own database for a customer and then leverage Maestro API?
So currently, we don't offer you to integrate with your own database, but you can build a third-party application where you can pass in the signed documents to your application, and you can do anything you want with the document that comes to you using your application.
With respect to conditional flows, is there an opportunity for conditional flows within Maestro so that, let's say, there's conditional logic, of course, you're going to take a different branch in the workflow.
Yes, we do have. There are conditional flows in Maestro. So you can use, Josh, if you wanted to quickly show the step, you could show it. But they're not within the web form, but it is after you collect the data from web forms, we can do something with the data in the web forms. And that is the branching rule that he's showing right now. Yeah.
So essentially, you can branch off of the data that comes earlier, right? So
Correct.
if you have web form and people have selected, oh, I want to create a, like a savings account or a checking account, then based on that, you can determine what path you want to take.
Okay, I think we have time for just the last two questions, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Yep. So then it's are all web forms used? Are they supposed to be power forms?
No, DocuSign built another alternative with Power Forms, which is the web forms, where it's more easier to use. So the web forms is different and Power Forms is different.
And the web forms also has its own API as well, so that we
Correct.
can leverage that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
The final question is, are there workflows for internal compliance-based tasks, such as internal starter or levers process? Echo the question regarding the Power Platform connectors, but if you can do this by HTTP requests and Power Automate. So I think there's other Power Automate questions, and we did answer the idea that, you know, with the Power Automate stuff, with, you know, we are still working to get those developed. But the question is there a workflow for internal compliance-based tasks, like maybe somebody's going to join a company or leave a company? Is there anything built in already that we have pre-packaged workflows that can be used to leverage that?
So the workflow templates effort is actually, in progress. So based on, whether it is industry or broad-based use case, like, HR onboarding, or, like ACH transfer, those kinds of use cases, which is vertical specific as well as broader use cases, that's currently in progress. The team is building it out as templates, so it helps kickstart the workflow creation process for customers. And we are looking to have that by end of the year, at least some of the automated workflow template and recipes. So stay tuned.
That's correct.
All right, thank you everybody for the presentation and the Q&A. That was great. Can we go to the next slide, please? Resources. So we have a new developer community space, and we have all of our resources posted there. I just dropped the link into the chat for everyone, and then we'll also share that via a follow-up email about a week from today. It'll include the recording and all of the resources that we covered here. There'll be a link directly to this site in that as well. Next slide. Okay, so that is it for today. Please note you will receive a survey at the end of the webinar. It pops up in your browser. We appreciate you taking that, telling us how we did and what you'd like to see for future webinars. Finally, I would also like to thank Uma for leading the webinar, Josh for demoing, and Sahit and Cameron for addressing all of the great questions that came in today. And thank you to all of you, our attendees, for joining us. We hope you have a great remainder of the day, everyone. And again, we hope to see you at our next webinar. Happy coding.